Hello everyone. Let's continue with today's article. Iron fortification, health risk of excessive iron intake. So, what is fortification? So, basically, fortification is it is a practice in which we uh, access the amount of specific nutrients in the food diet. For example, suppose in rice I wanted to increase the amount of iron. So how can I improve this? How can I access the amount of iron? By doing some kind of food processing technology. So this is called fortification. So health risk of excessive iron intake. So there will be health risk if there will be excessive iron intake by us. So this article has been written by Anura Krupat and Janani Muralidharan. The net effect of iron provision through fortification on hemoglobin formation is likely to be lower than thought. So basically, we why do we do fortification of iron? To have a optimum amount of hemoglobin in our body. But it has been seen that even after the fortification of food, okay, the amount of hemoglobin that is found in our body is less than what we expected. So iron is essential mineral body for mainly body function, including the formation of hemoglobin, but can be can be harmful when taken in excess. One of the methods suggested for the treatment of iron deficiency anemia is the fortification of food with iron. So basically, we know that iron helps in the many bodily functions. So it is one of the basic element that is found in our body. So if there will be a deficiency of iron in our body, then we will have anemia. Okay. So how we treat this disease? We basically do fortification of iron. Okay. And the food that in which we do fortification is called fortified food. Typically, a chosen food staple such as wheat, rice, or even salt is fortified to provide up to two-thirds of the iron requirement of adult women and almost the entire daily requirement of men. So basically, when we do the fortification of food, there is said that almost adult women required 10 milligram per day of iron. Okay, and men require almost entire day. The excess consumption of iron can occur if one habitually consumes a balanced quality diet to begin with or exceed limits of consumption of the fortified food. Begin with or exceed limits of consumption of. So excess consumption of iron means there should be sometimes there is a excess limit of iron. Okay, because when we consume fortified food means something we have something that is a specific amount of nutrients has been increased in that food while doing food processing. That is called fortified food. Means food in which we do fortification. So tolerable upper limit. There is a defined level of iron intake beyond which the risk of adverse events begin to increase, called the tolerable upper limit of intake. So everything has some limitations. So if we take intake iron uh, in excess amount, then it will have some side effects. So the limit is called the tolerable upper limit, means the limit at which we should consume iron. That is given of 40 milligram per day. It will especially deleterious for population who have iron overload states like patients and thalassemia. So it is harmful for populations and damage. Okay, when we take iron in excess amount, so it will cause disease like thalassemia. Thalassemia is a disease in which we have blood disorder, and there is a deficiency of hemoglobin. Once iron is absorbed, it is thought that its excretion is steady and very simple. small, so, and very small, except when bleeding takes place, as with menstrual bleeding. So, thus, women can excrete iron from the body. Men cannot. Men cannot. This makes vulnerable to excess iron intake. So, in the case of women, the iron is absorbed and steadily it is excreted by the woman in the form of menstrual cycle. Okay, I hope you understand by this menstrual cycle. But in the case of men, there is a no other than there is no extra excretion way to discharge the iron. So there is excess amount of iron intake in the men. Recent studies shows that with fortification there is an increased excretion of iron in children. It is not exactly how or through what route this extra excretion takes place. It is likely that extra iron is lost through the intestine, where cells of intestinal lining exfoliate or drop off, thereby deposit the iron into the intestinal lumen for excretion, or through the urine. Nevertheless, beyond the excess stored, the net effect of iron provision through fortification hemoglobin is likely to be lower than thought. So once more, recent studies shows that fortification there is increased excretion of iron in children. So recent studies has shown that there is a large amount of iron that is being excreted by the children, that is discharged by the children. It is not known exactly how or through what route this excretion takes place. So there basically we don't know means how this mechanism works. Okay, it is likely that extra iron is lost through the intestine, where cells of the intestinal lining exfoliate or drop off and therefore deposit their iron into the intestinal lumen for excretion. So basically what happens that when there is extra iron, okay, it goes through the intestine. So, okay, so when it goes through the intestine, so intestinal lining exfoliate means there will be a wearing of the intestinal lining, and there is a and in that lumen the iron element deposited in that intestinal lumen. Okay, intestinal lumen, and in that way and on the way from in this way they are being excreted through the in the form of urine or some other. Beyond the excess store, the net effect of iron provision through fortification and hemoglobin formation is likely to be lower than thought, as we have talked before. So even after the fortification, we have seen that the amount of hemoglobin form is less than what we expected, to the extent that body can. It will try to regulate iron absorption, but excess iron in the fortified diet can be remain unabsorbed. So typically it is expected that just 510% of the ingested iron is absorbed and the rest is excreted. So whatever the amount of iron we consume, so almost approximately 5-10% of iron is already is just absorbed and the rest is discharged by our body. So harmful effects. Studies have shown that unabsorbed iron can lead to inflammation in the gastrointestinal lining and disrupt the colonic microbiota with a long term of consequences. So, if there will be unabsorbed iron in the intestine, so it will give a red pain, or means inflammation is something that is paining or in the form that will damage the gastrointestinal lining, and it will harm the intestine. The irritation of the lining may present itself clinically as abdominal cramps and constipation or diarrhea. So this will be the consequences if there will be unabsorbed iron in the intestine. In addition, the irritation of mucosa can lead to gastrointestinal blood. Uh, so basically, in the intestine there is a layers of skin. So mucosa is also one of the layers in the inner side of the intestinal lining. An excess of iron in the gastrointestinal tract can impair the absorption of other minerals. A more pressing worry is that excess iron has been closely linked to diabetes, so it will also cause diabetes. Iron can cause oxidative stress in the body, which can damage cells, protein, and DNA with long term of consequences. So they can also damage cells, protein, and it will also affect the DNA. This chronic oxidative stress leads to the impairment of mitochondrial beta oxidation. So these are the biological process that will affect that will be in effect if we consume more iron. Long chain fatty acids. The abnormal fat oxidation leads to the excessive serum triglyceridemia and excessive accumulative triglycerides in muscles and liver tissues. So, an analysis of data on blood biomarkers of chronic disease risk from a comprehensive national nutritional survey in India, adolescent children showed that for every 10 microgram per liter, MC, I don't know, microcentigram per liter, increase in serum ferritin, the risk of having high fasting serum glucose, total cholesterol, triglycerides, and hypertension increased proportionality. This is the data that's shown by the comprehensive national nutritional survey that in adolescent child for this much of liter increase in serum creatine there is a high risk of fasting serum glucose, total cholesterol, and hypertension. A scenario analysis of the data shows that if an additional 10 milligram of iron per day were provided by fortification, the prevalence of the high fasting serum glucose could be increased by 214% across different socio-economic groups. So this is the analysis that has shown that the analysis has been done, and it has shown that if there is a consumption of 10 milligram of iron, extra iron per day, okay, there will be a prevalence of high fasting serum glucose, and that could increase 214% through different socio-economic groups. In very high amount, iron has a role to play the hepatic stellate cell activation and excessive deposition of extracellular matrix in the liver. This can lead to the liver fibrosis and subsequent progression to cirrhosis. So individual approach. Even though iron fortification has been successful in addressing iron deficiency, so but it is important to consider the dangers of consuming too much iron. So, even we know that while practicing the iron fortification, we have not completely eradicated the problem, but at least we have solved the problem at much extent. So, but it there should be also kept in mind that if we consume much more iron, there will be some side effects that we have discussed in the previous paragraphs. Okay, rather than adopting the mandatory iron fortification programs, where unsupervised iron makes intakes are instituted across a diverse population, it is imperative to develop individualized strategies and ensure through monitoring to detect any adverse event at the earliest. So there are unsupervised programs that is being consumed by the diverse population. So it is totally depends on the individual, and they have to monitor themselves at what amount of iron should they consume. Uh, there is no doubt that more segments of the population need extra dietary iron, but not all. Eventually, precision in public is health is essential if we are to avoid the risk of iron overload and the potential for long-term chronic illness. As a public health strategy, the pendulum should not swing all the way to the other side. So, since we know that in the context of India, I would say, so India is one of the largest populated country. So most of the people comes under the malnutrition, suffers from the malnutrition. So there is a need for iron fortification, but there are some small segments of people. So that should be also monitored that there should be no iron overloaded to that people. Okay, and if we means this term fortification, this is a term that has been generated by the UN, and means I don't know means this practice is being done in developed countries, but in India also maybe, or in African countries, because there is poverty is at very high, so that's why So maybe this food processing of iron is being done in those countries, where maybe in some developing countries or in poor countries like in African continents. So this is today's article, so you can go through it.